This is the kill count, where I count every kill and every death in the games I play. Today, I'm playing The Walking Dead Season 1, developed by Telltale Games and released in 2012 over the course of 8 months and 5 individual episodes. The Walking Dead Season 1 was a massive success that spawned numerous follow-ups as well as several other titles in well-established series. It's separate from the TV show, instead taking place in the same universe as Robert Kirkman's comic series, but contains mostly unique characters created specifically for the game. We play as Lee Everett as he takes on a parental role to the adorable 8-year-old Clementine, soon after the zombie apocalypse begins in the Atlanta area. Telltale crafted one of the greatest stories ever told in video game format with a heavy emphasis on its characters, but how many of them meet their end during the zombie uprising, while Lee attempts to shield Clementine from their new horrifying reality?
What's eating you?
We begin episode 1 with a skyline shot of Atlanta before it pans down to our protagonist Lee Everett handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser. The officer chats with Lee and reckons he didn't commit the crime he's going to prison for, but it sure as shit seems like a major one is going down the other way as we watch several cops speed towards the city. Lee chats back and forth with the officer, telling him about the pharmacy his family owns down south in Macon, and that he left that city to become a teacher in Atlanta. While the cop locks eyes with Lee in the rear view and tells him why he believes he's innocent, Lee shouts about the person shambling on the road. There's not enough time to avoid it and the car smashes into the first zombie in the game, but since we can't confirm the brain was destroyed here, I can't add it to the count. The accident sends the cruiser off-roading, where Lee blacks out and wakes up to a deep gash on his leg, in the first official kill of the game as the officer lays motionless a little ways from the vehicle. Lee laboriously Sparta kicks the window out so he can limp over to the cop's corpse and unlock his handcuffs with his keys, but then the officer springs back to life to make sure Lee doesn't worsen his situation by adding a fleeing charge to his resume. He's a bit too aggressive in his approach though, so Lee backs up and uses the shotgun on the ground to shred the brain of the zombie officer, giving him the unique title of being the first human and first undead kill of the game. Zombie games can be a little tricky to count because technically someone has to die to become a zombie, but I'm not going to count every single zombie we see as a kill. I'll only count those if we see them turn into a zombie during the game. Lee sees someone in the distance and shouts for help, but she spots what's coming for him and runs the opposite direction. Lee notices even more zombies coming from the woods and does the zombie shuffle into the neighborhood just beyond the trees. Distant gunshots draw the attention of the small mob trying to break down the fence protecting Lee, giving us some time to look around. This house can be seen as an Easter egg in one of my favorite games ever, in The Last of Us. It's not an exact replica, but the layout is similar enough to be immediately recognizable. Lee enters the house to find it abandoned, which turns out to be great for him as no one can see him biff it on the wet linoleum. Except for me, Lee. I saw that shit. Lee listens to the 3 messages on the answering machine that make it clear the owners of this house ran into some undead trouble down in Savannah. He picks up the walkie-talkie in the kitchen and is contacted by a young girl hiding out in the treehouse outside.
Yo, bitch, you're in my house.
Lee is inside Clementine's home, who is left alone with her babysitter Sandra after her parents went to Savannah. She shrieks and tells him to watch out just in time to fend off the assault by her babysitter, who tackles Lee to the ground trying to snack on that snack. Clementine runs down to tell Lee what time it is, and he uses the hammer to make mincemeat of Sandra's head. Oh my god, man. Being a zombie game, there's plenty of gore throughout, but the art style influenced by the comic book ensures the gore is never overwhelming. The comic uses black and white, and Telltale actually broached the idea of doing the same for the game, but as they began development, they found out it just didn't look quite right, and when they added color, everything just popped and gave the game its unique look. Lee promises to look after Clementine until they can find her parents, knowing full well they probably didn't make it based on the earlier messages. Not wanting to wait until nighttime, we head out the side gate to find a couple young bros attempting to clear a path for their truck. At certain points throughout the game, I encountered a small bug that left the reticle on screen during cinematics, so just ignore it. We meet Chet and Sean, who offers to take us back to his family's farm if we help with their endeavor. Some walkers take to the streets offering to help lessen the load, but the thought of getting their ass eaten,
What did he say?
makes things a bit more urgent. They push the car right in time to jump into the truck and speed towards the farm before the undead can swarm them. Chet heads back to his home next door while we meet Sean's father, Herschel Green, the first character from the comic books to make an appearance. We introduce ourselves and he offers his barn up a shelter for the night where another family of 3 is currently residing. Herschel cleans Lee's leg wound while Sean tells his father he thinks they should fortify their fences in the morning in case any walkers enter their property. But Herschel doesn't quite understand the severity of the situation and tries telling him they have other chores leftovers and don't need any more. Lee backs Sean up and offers to help him out as Herschel finishes cleaning the wound and warns about a possible infection.
What do we do then?
We'll probably just have to shoot you.
Inside the barn, Lee and Clementine attempt to go to sleep, but it's stinking something fierce inside.
Shit.
It's gonna get much worse in there later, Lee. Trust me on that. Lee and Clementine are played by Dave Fennoy and Melissa Hutchison. Lee was actually recast during development after the first actor had recorded the entire script. The team felt someone else would better convey the emotions Lee should be feeling throughout the course of the game, and their decision to do that ultimately paid off. Melissa, on the other hand, was chosen because Telltale had such a difficult time finding the right mixture of a childlike voice that was also capable of understanding the character. And when you watch Melissa talk like Clementine, I think she made it an easy choice for them to cast her in the role.
It's all kind of like, instead of like using my chest and my diaphragm, but with Clementine, I can just go there right now, like her, I think maybe because of all the recording we did, it's stuck.
They eventually get some rest, and the following morning we're woken up by Kenny, who introduces Lee to his son Ken Jr., who also goes by Duck. When asked how he earned that nickname, he says that nothing ever really bothers him, like water off a duck's back.
But frankly, I think it's because he's dumb as a bag of hammers.
Lee tells Kenny he's going down to Macon's since he has family there, and Kenny offers to drive him since that's on their way to Florida anyway. He's a commercial fisherman that plans to head back home and get on their boat until everything blows over, believing the government will start handing out vaccinations to get things under control. Lee drops Clem off with Kenny's wife Katja so he can assist Sean with the fence while Duck pretends to drive the tractor nearby. After giving Sean his wood, Lee wanders over to Herschel and chats him up for a minute. One of the best features of the game is how conversations and situations differ depending on your choices. Since I decided not to be 100% truthful to these strangers, Herschel gets all high and mighty on Lee. But mid-scolding, we hear a scream in the distance. We run back to Sean and find Duck accidentally move the tractor forward and pin Sean's leg underneath it. The noise attracts zombies who reach through the fence and grab both Sean and Duck. This is my first real major decision of the game. Do I choose to save Sean or do I choose to save Duck? I select Duck, and with Lee's and Kenny's powers combined, they pull the idiot child from the claws of the walker. Kenny plays Duck Duck Goose the wrong way by running on the first Duck, leaving Sean behind. Lee attempts to help, but Sean screams announce dinner to the walkers who get their bell rung by Herschel's gun, bumping the kill total up to 7. Distraught at the loss of his son, Herschel yells at everyone to
Get the fuck out of here!
We quickly oblige and we go down to Macon, where it looks just as disastrous as Atlanta. Kenny yells to the person crouched down just out of sight, but that's not a person, that's a walker. And it's time for dessert. We spot an unnamed individual that became zombie dinner before many more undead flood the streets, also looking for a meal. They're in the mood for foie gras, so they lunge at Duck, but get blown away by a random woman that stops just short of a triple kill. The group is ushered inside a pharmacy and suffers an uncomfortable scene showing the other group is clearly split between letting them die and letting them live, with one old ox of a man being very assholey about it all. His name is Larry, and he truly fucking sucks, dude. He believes Duck has been bit and attempts to convince everyone else that he needs to be killed or thrown out before he turns into a walker. While all this goes down, Clementine sneaks off to take a leak, but the bathroom contains a nasty surprise and it's not a sneaky number 2. Thankfully, Carly lends her insane aim yet again to earn that triple kill, but the noise attracts the attention of the undead in the streets. Larry's heart can't contain the amount of bitch acidness he's putting out, which actually helps simmer down the group since he can no longer instigate anything. Lee knows this pharmacy and tells Larry's daughter Lily where she can find nitroglycerin pills to help with his condition, but the way is locked for now. Glenn Rhee speaks up here, saying he'll make gas runs so they can escape together in Kenny's truck. He lives in the area and knows how to navigate it well. This marks the second character from the comics that we meet, but since all this takes place before Rick Grimes wakes up in the hospital, it gives us a little insight into where they were before the events of the comic books. Lee hands him his walkie-talkie, telling him Clementine has the other one in case he needs anything. Now that things have quieted down, the zombies aren't so aggro, so we spend time meeting some of the characters here. Doug is keeping an eye on the zombies outside, while Carly is trying to get the radio working. You know when you troubleshoot electronics, customer service almost always asks if you've plugged it in or turned it on? Carly is the reason for that question because the radio simply doesn't have any batteries, and even worse, she doesn't even know how to put them in correctly. I mean, for fuck's sake, Carly, the plus and minus are right there. Kenny admits he feels terrible for what happened at Herschel's farm, thinking he's partly responsible for Sean's death. Word, dude, I agree. After making sure Clem is fed, Lee talks to Lily and finds out there was an older couple found found dead in the back office that the group pulled out and disposed of. Almost certain that was his mom and dad, Lee ends the conversation and heads into the office where he finds a photo. They didn't capture his good side in it, so he tears himself out of the picture right before Carly comes in to spill the tea on why Lee was on his way to prison. She followed his case and he was convicted of killing a senator that slept with his wife, but she promises to keep it secret, keep it safe, because those types of skills may come in handy during a zombie apocalypse. Clementine offers to assist Lee in clearing the office door so they can grab the peels Larry needs for his failing heart. Lee shows he's unfamiliar with children.
No kids have allergies or asthma or just general maladies.
I got a mean case of swamp ass.
We hear from Glenn over the walkie that he got cornered at a nearby motel and is in need of some help. Lee and sharpshooter Carly arrive at the seedy motel to find Glenn hiding in an icebox. He claims there's a survivor trapped in one of the upstairs rooms that needs our help too, so we formulate a plan to take out the zombies occupying the place. First, we see a person providing valuable protein to one of the walkers, and through a series of Sam Fisher-inspired maneuvers, silently take out the 6 undead squatting at the motel. When the woman declines to show any gratitude for our heroic actions, Lee starts kicking the damn door down, which convinces her to open the door and reveal she's been bitten. Irene is terrified of what's to come, saying her boyfriend was bitten and turned into a walker too.
You have a boyfriend?
Well, not anymore, Glenn, you horny, cold-hearted weirdo. She spots the gun in Carly's hand and asks if she can borrow it for a second, but she's hesitant until Lee demands she either shoot Irene herself or let her go out her own way. Carly hands the gun over and Lee offers to stay behind to grab the gun after the deed is done. He comforts Irene in her final moments as she chooses a quick death over the alternative. We join the group back at the pharmacy with a couple cans of gas. Next up is saving Larry's hateful heart, but since the door to the medicine is locked and we don't want to make a bunch of noise, we head out into the safe gated area out front with Doug. Lee is able to break a window using a brick to attract the zombies to the opposite direction, then runs over to the trapped zombie on the other side of the street that turns out to be his brother. We watch as Lee monologues maybe a bit too long considering his back is turned to a mob of walkers, but he tells his zombro that he's sorry for not being here for them right before he's forced into brutally killing him so he can safely take his keys. Once back inside, we use the keys to open the door, which sets off an alarm that will bring every zombie in the hood to them. But at least we got the pills for bitch-ass Larry, I guess. We see a random citizen in the streets that looks to have died flying out of their windshield, while we watch a horde of zombies fill the streets and head towards the pharmacy. Kenny tells everyone he'll pull his truck around back while Lee, Doug, and Carly barricade the doors and windows to buy some time. Carly continues to add to her kill total by doming a couple walkers, while Clementine helps get the door secured. Directly afterwards, we're forced into another major decision, where we need to choose between saving Doug or saving Carly. I'm sorry, Doug, but Carly is a beast with that gun, so Lee chooses to help her, and she immediately adds another 2 kills to the count. Regretfully, Doug gets pulled out of the window in a similar way to David in Shaun of the Dead, except it's not nearly as gruesome. Lee ensures everyone is out safe and runs to the back, but bitch-ass Larry has another idea and sucker punches him, claiming Lee ain't coming with him. Thankfully, Kenny is there to pick him up, while also bashing a zombie's brain in for another kill. They drive over to the motel knowing it's been cleared of any life, or death. I don't know. Either way, there's nothing there looking to chomp down on them anymore. After listening to the information coming out of Atlanta, Glenn informs the group he has friends he's concerned about and is going to split off to see if he can help them. Lee asks Clem if she's okay, but in her childlike innocence, she's just sad that her walkie-talkie broke in the pharmacy. In a stark contrast to adorable little Clementine, we talk to Larry, who reveals he knows who Lee is and that he's going to keep a close eye on him. The group decides to shelter in place at the motel, thinking everything will be just peachy, and with classic timing, the lights go out and episode 1 ends there. 3 months later, Lee axes the zombie to save some food for their survivors, finding out it was chewing on a not-so-lucky rabbit's foot. At some point between episode 1 and 2, the group took in Mark, who they found along with a wealth of food, but food is running low now and they're getting desperate. Lily is in charge of rationing and certain members are fed up with her. Mark even tells Lee that Kenny is knocking around the idea of leaving the motel once he can get an RV they found up and running. Mark spots a crow and lines up a shot, not knowing that if you befriend that sucker, it'll return shiny things as presents. He misses his chance at a poor meal and avian rewards as it flies off after Mark's terrible shot. Wondering if he nailed God with that shot, we hear a scream echo out and run towards it to find a couple students trying to pry their teacher David out of a bear trap. Kenny joins us, but the loud noises attract some undead, and since the trap has been modified, we don't have a way to release the guy's leg. Right off the bat, we have to make a difficult decision. Do we continue to try and pry David's leg free or show off Lee's proficiency in chop stopping. Despite his pleas, I start cutting while Kenny shoots zombies off screen. We have no way of knowing if he killed any, so the count remains the same, whereas David's limb count is reduced by a half leg. Mark carries him on his back and we hurry away. However, one of the students named Travis falls on his ass and dooms himself to become zombie poop. We check in at the motel and drop David off with Katja. She's a veterinarian and is best suited for the job. Bringing the newbies back sets bitch-ass Larry off and gets the group arguing again. I love that Clementine is like, here we go again, and searches for any excuse to pull Ben away so he doesn't have to be involved. Since Lily is sick of feeling like the bad guy, she tells Lee if he's such a tough guy, then he can have it rough guy and distribute the rations himself. I have 4 food items to give to 10 people, and both of the children get prioritized and fed first. Clem is happy to get some food even though it's not an ice cream sundae, but the biggest bummer is she lost her hat and doesn't know where it could have gone. Lee promises he'll keep an eye out for it as he gives the final 2 items to Kenny and then Lily. Once finished, Lee gets mean mugged by those who didn't get food, and he continues his rounds with each character at the motel. He hands his axe over to Mark, who is helping fortify their barricade with bitch-ass Larry, who gets aggro again when I choose not to give it to him instead. Katja reports to the group that David lost too much blood and succumbed to his wound, but a few seconds later he springs up to give an unwanted back rub. After a short scuffle, Carly saves Lee from an undead existence with yet another kill. The group turns to the other student Ben and screams at him for not letting everyone know David was bitten. However, a bite isn't the only way to turn in this universe. Everyone is doomed to become a walker when they die unless their brain is destroyed. The group only gets a few seconds to process that information until Carly spots a couple men approaching their location and orders them to stop. We meet brothers Andy and Danny St. John, who are just looking to do some trading. They have plenty of food and want to trade for some gas. Lee, Mark, Ben, and Carly set out with the St. John brothers towards their dairy farm to confirm they got milk. Our quiet walk is interrupted by shouting nearby, so everyone ducks down to get a peek at the drama unfolding between a couple bandits. The argument ends with one bandit shooting the other, and once he leaves, we jump forward to the farm. We meet their mom Brenda, who comes out with a whole ass bread basket and offers to provide a feast for everyone from the motel. So Carly and Ben roll back to the motel and leave Mark and Lee behind to examine the property to ensure it's safe. Andy lets them know their electrified fence has John coffeed some zombies, bogging it down, and he could use their help clearing it. He shuts off the northwest section so they can safely pull the 3 re-deaded undead off the fence. The last zombie toppled it entirely though, and the easiest way to pull it off is to hop over to the other side, but the fence turns back on and traps them outside the property. Then with suspiciously good timing, Mark takes an arrow to the shoulder, which is way better than a knee, so we can take cover behind a well-placed tractor that inches forward until it's stopped by a walker corpse. This section is a little strange because they mention the bodies blocking the tractor were removed from the fence, but they don't match the bodies of the 3 we watched them remove, so it'll be counted separately from them along with this one as we... Oh, never mind. The game ramps up the tension as we have to slowly walk alongside the tractor so we don't get shot by the bandits, while the walker Lee tossed aside makes up ground behind them until a well-placed arrow impales its head. They make a break through the gate and run back to Andy to inform him some bandits attacked them after the fence turned on. Andy apologizes, claiming he thought he heard Mark yell to turn the fence on. The rest of the group arrives, minus Carly and Ben, who stayed at the motel to protect it, and immediately wonder if they made a good decision to come here after seeing Mark's shoulder. Brenda pulls Mark into the house so she can treat him, while Andy explains they made a deal with the bandits to provide food in exchange for protection, but recently things have gone sour. Danny tells Lee he knows of a camp, and they set out into the woods and find an abandoned campsite. While searching the camp, Danny's energy seems way off.
243 will keep you warmer at night than any lady I ever known.
Well, more off than usual. Like when he shows relief when Lee tells him a camcorder he found is dead. What really confuses Lee though is when he finds Clementine's hat in the tent, but he doesn't get much time to think about it when a woman named Jolene sneaks up on them. She makes some strange remarks about Danny and claims to know what he has planned for Lee, but when she starts talking about their balls, Danny has enough and puts a bullet directly into the center of her forehead. Back at the farm, Brenda tells Lee Din Din is almost finished and that he needs to let Mark rest from his arrow wound. All while Lily and Kenny continue to argue. Kenny believes something fucky is going on in their barn, but when Lee moves over, we see the group is just chilling with Cow St. John. Lee hands Clem her hat back, asking if she saw anything weird at the motel, but she doesn't recall seeing anything. In the back of the barn, Kenny informs Lee he saw some sharp objects back there before Andy rushed to lock the door. Kenny makes some ignorant-ass assumptions of Lee, asking him to pick the lock.
Why would you say that?
Well, you're, you know, urban?
Oh, you are not saying what I think you're saying.
Kenny is voiced by Gavin Hammond, who approached the character as if he was the man from Cormac McCarthy's The Road. He's a family-oriented guy that will do whatever it takes to protect his own, but he does play into just about every redneck stereotype there is, personifying that classic Florida man identity.
Jesus, man, I'm from Florida. Crazy shit just comes out of my mouth sometimes. Sorry.
Lee brushes off Kenny's comment and sets out to distract Andy so they can check out the back door. After presenting his multi-tool, Lee takes the belt out of the generator powering their fence, much to the chagrin of Andy.
Son of
When Lee gets back to the barn, they announce dinner is ready, and Kenny promises he'll make an excuse for him while he examines the back room. But Kenny fucking fails us, because Andy comes in right when Lee opens the door and asks what we're doing. He claims he and Danny still need to hunt on top of the food they produce on the farm, so they use that back room as a butcher station. He leads Lee to the dinner table, but Mark is suspiciously absent. Alarm bells are ringing in Lee's head, so he asks to go wash his hands, and instead sneaks upstairs where he finds Mark sporting some injuries he's fairly certain the bandits didn't cause. Mark tells Lee he's been daved by the St. John's and warns him not to eat the meat. Lee scrambles downstairs right as Clem pops some in her mouth. She spits it out once Lee urges her to do so, but the rest of the group have already begun eating and don't quite believe him. It takes a few seconds for it to set in, but it isn't fully accepted until the St. John's confirm it themselves. Brenda was raised not to be wasteful, so why let the walkers eat people when they can gobble them up instead? Her logic is sound, but that still makes their actions really fucking gross and heinous. Eventually, the group is split up with Katja and Doug kept inside the house and everyone else relocated to a small meat freezer in the barn. Lee wakes up to Larry loudly and angrily banging on the door until his heart says enough and puts him on the floor. While Lily performs CPR, Kenny wants to spring into action and confirm the big man is dead. Otherwise, if he comes back as a walker, they'll be trapped in a confined room with him. Lily mentions he's no longer breathing, but we don't actually know for sure if he died from the heart attack. We do confirm his death when Lee elects to protect Clementine and everyone else by siding with Kenny, who picks up a large salt lick and crushes Larry's head in an ironic death to the saltiest old man around. While Lily mourns her dad all by herself, Lee hugs Clem to comfort her during what is easily her most traumatizing day, and after some investigating encourages her to crawl through a small space behind the AC unit to unlock the door. We find ourselves in the butcher room and have a few weapons to choose from, but since I'm sick of their shit, I pickle the sickle. Kenny and Lee are forced into hiding where we overhear the brothers discuss their plan to kill everyone except for Katja, who will be forced into caring for their cow. When Lee pops his head out, Danny is there pointing a gun at it, but his trigger finger is way too slow and Lee is able to tickle him with the sickle. Kenny joins in on the stabbing, which causes Danny to fall on his fanny into a bear trap. In a weird turn, Danny excitedly tells Lee that he can eat him now, but he has to keep him alive so his meat doesn't spoil. Lee decides the only fork he'll use on Danny is the pitch of variety to end his life, then runs after Kenny to help save his family. On our way there, some wrestling stops Lee in his tracks and we watch Carly take out another zombie. Her and Ben came to check on us and Lee tells them to go around the property since the fence is electrified. When Lee crosses the front door, he finds himself in a standoff with Brenda, who has Katja captive. She switches between pointing the gun at her and Lee while slowly backing up the stairs into the waiting arms of a zombified Mark. She's entirely too focused on Lee and eventually walks into Mark, getting pulled back and chomped in yet another ironic death. Outside, we watch Kenny foolishly rush at Andy, who shoots him in the side. Andy has the upper hand with Duck in his grasp, but in a rare miss by Carly, he gets his ear blasted off, which causes him to release the child, and instead catches Lee's hands. Lee beats on his face for a minute as the group watches on, but while the adrenaline wears off, Lee realizes he doesn't want to play with Andy anymore and stands up. They begin their hike back to the motel as the camera zooms out to show zombies invading the farm, and while we can assume Andy dies here, we never actually see it. The beauty of this game is how many decisions the player can make that will make their playthrough different from someone else's. Those decisions can be major ones that kill off characters or small ones made during a short side conversation. Robert Kirkman agreed to let Telltale create a game in his universe because he was a fan of their previous work and didn't want another game similar to a Resident Evil or a Left 4 Dead. Lee Everett remains one of the best protagonists out there in large part due to the writers. They wanted someone who would contrast Rick Grimes from the comics. He's someone people immediately recognize as a good guy until they spend more time with him and witness the atrocities he commits, whereas we join Lee while he's literally on his way to prison for committing murder, and volunteers to protect this little girl who desperately needed someone to do exactly that. On their way back to the motel, we encounter a vacant station wagon that looks freshly abandoned. It's absolutely loaded with supplies, which poses the question, do we take it or leave it? Knowing they were already desperate before the dairy farm situation, Lee elects to take the supplies and hopes no one is expecting to come back to the car with nothing left. Carly finds some batteries and actually puts them in the camcorder correctly. Bravo! It contains a video of Jolene spying on them from the woods near the motel, showing she was the one that snuck in and stole Clementine's hat, and that's where episode 2 leaves off. The next episode begins with Lee and Kenny back in Macon while they discuss their plan to leave the motel behind. They intend to tour the pharmacy, but Kenny breaks the ladder on the semi-truck, which forces Lee to find another way up. He gets a jeep close enough where he can grab Kenny's hand, but instead gets dropped because Kenny is too weak to pull him up due to the bullet wound he sustained back on the farm. Lee's booty loudly claps on the jeep, but what lures the zombies out is the screaming woman that emerges from a building down the street. Once Lee sees that she gets gnawed on, he chooses to end her misery instead of letting her get eaten, which means they have very limited time to get into the pharmacy and gather the good shit. Walkers bust in uninvited on our way out and pin Lee beneath a door. Kenny shoves them off and frees Lee so he can return the favor and pin a zombie underneath a fridge. Kenny blasts a couple walkers in the head on our way out and we cut back to the motel. They deliver the medicine to Lily, who is still in charge of supplies. She's an absolute wreck and even quicker to anger since her father's demise, especially towards Kenny. On top of that, she believes someone is stealing from their stash because her count has been off, and she asks Lee to do some investigative work to uncover the traitor. While talking to each survivor, Carly recommends spilling the beans about Lee's murderous past. Larry knew who he was and he undoubtedly told Lily, and Carly thinks she'll use that information to hang over his head eventually. Agreeing that she has a fair point, Lee tells everyone at the motel and they all kind of wave it off. Except for Duck. He's too dumb to understand that, and only wants to help Lee with the mystery of the missing meds. With his assistance, we find a baggie hidden inside a vent outside the barricade. Lee door dashes those pills directly to Lily's door, but as she forms a plan to line everyone up for questioning, the motel gets invaded by the bandit group that attacked them at the St. John farm. Lily grabs her rifle and asks Lee to distract the guys holding a bunch of weapons. He tries to negotiate with them while Lily gets into position, and once she lines up her shot, all hell breaks loose. 3 bandits are killed right away by Lily and Carly, followed by 5 more after Lee gets a hold of a weapon, with another bandit falling due to a zombie. Lee urges Katja and Duck to run towards him so they can get into the RV, but they're tackled to the ground by a zombie that Lee quickly kills. Now that most of the bandits are cleared, the motel starts to flood with walkers, netting another 7 kills between Lee and Lily. As the camera pans out and the group takes off in their meth cooker, we spot a bandit getting tackled and chewed on by a zombie for 1 more kill. On our way out, we run over a few walkers, but can't confirm any of their brains were destroyed. Now out of harm's way, Lily decides it's the perfect time to interrogate Ben and Carly, suspecting one or both of them are responsible for making them homeless. After plowing into a zombie so hard it gets stuck on the RV, Kenny is forced to pull over, and Lily takes her questioning to the great outdoors. The zombie is clearly still alive while Kenny tries to pry it free, and Lily only succeeds in stressing Ben out and getting called a scared little bitch by Carly. It seems to me bitch acidness is hereditary. Finally, Kenny squashes the head of the walker and comes over to the group to ask what's going on. Lily shows instead of tells by suddenly blasting Carly right in her fucking face. Lee forces her to drop the gun and they all agree to leave her behind, and in her desperation she tells the group Lee is a convicted killer.
Yeah, we know.
You already told us, dumbass.
Everyone gathers into the RV except for Lily, and the last time we see her is when she sprints into the forest away from the Walking Dead.
Oh my god, he said it.
To add to our terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, Katja and Kenny inform Lee that Duck got bit back at the motel and ask him to inform Clementine. He sits down with her and breaks the news.
Good.
Sometime later, we're forced to stop when we encounter a train blocking the road. While exploring it, we find evidence that one of the train cars was being used, and when we check out the engine up front, tally up kill number 69. Nice! While searching the train for a way to get it running, we encounter the person living there, named Chuck, otherwise known as Charles. Wait, Charles? On a train? Oh my god, it's Choo Choo Charles! After solving a puzzle to get it up and running, we're moving along the tracks as Duck's health is getting foul, but Kenny refuses to accept reality, whereas Katja recognizes what they have to do as parents and asks if they can pull a John Mayer and stop this train. With Kenny too distraught to end Duck's misery, Katja takes his gun and walks into the woods. Nearly a minute later, a gunshot rings out from the trees, and both Kenny and Lee walk towards it to help bring Katja back. But when we arrive, we find she used the gun on herself in a really fucked up and depressing turn of events. Kenny breaks down at the sudden loss and turns towards his son to see him sitting there struggling to breathe. You can choose to ease the burden on Kenny here and do it yourself, or do what I did and encourage him to end his son's life. I mean, that's his little boy, and he should be the one to put the toy torturer to rest. Back on the train, Lee chats with Clementine, who says that Chuck told her she'll wind up like Duck 2 one day, which gets Lee fuming. He charges to the front of the train to tell Chuck off, but finds out he actually has some great points that will help ensure Clementine's survival in this world. Instead of coddling her, Lee teaches her how to use a gun, and despite her pleas, cuts her hair short so it can't be so easily grabbed. Lee shares a drink with Chuck and Kenny, and afterwards Ben admits he's the one that was providing supplies to the bandits. He claims they had one of his friends, but when he realized they were lying to him, it was already too late. So Lee angrily tells him to keep that shit to himself, and goes back to Clem where they discuss their plan when they get to Savannah. She of course wants to search for her parents, and Lee still doesn't have the heart to tell her they did. She says because of their integrity, they always stayed at the Marsh House Hotel, and then the train comes to a sudden stop. Everyone exits and sees a tanker filled with gasoline dangling from the overpass that sends Kenny on an F-bomb spree. Curious who the fucking potty mouth is, we meet Omid and Krista. They offer to help move the tanker since it's barely holding on, and they invite Lee up to take a gander. After introductions, they're aware the group has had a pretty garbage day so far, and they're just happy to see a kid in RL. While the rest of them get acquainted, Lee and Clem walk down the tracks to a small train station with rooftop art they can't see from ground level. It's much easier to read than Don't Dead open inside at least, right? The door is locked, but using the Mighty Mask method, Clem unlocks the door while standing on Lee's shoulders. Inside, we notice a small torch that can detach that tanker, but that door is locked too and requires hoisting Clem up and over to unlock it. But in a complete lapse of judgment, Lee forgot to verify the room is clear and gets attacked. Using a wrench, Lee kills the 2 walkers himself and notices Clem frozen in place while aiming the gun. I mean, she was just taught how to use the thing, and fear took over, so it's not a big deal. But more importantly, we need to get her the hell out of there before another walker on her side can grab her. She hands the keys over and Lee opens it just in time to dome the zombie. We grab the torch before Krista comes running to make sure we're okay. Back at the tanker, we nearly fall when it shifts and Omid pulls Lee back just in time. But now it's out of reach and Omid just so happens to be a short king that Lee can hold to finish the job. But then a wave of stink singes the nostrils and Ben spots a huge horde of undead shambling down the tracks towards us. Omid is able to get the tanker loose, which knocks the ladder off and crashes down to the ground, leaking gasoline all over. Kenny starts the train up and gets it chugga-chugging away from the incoming army, while Lee has an idea to help slow them down by kicking the torch to the gasoline puddle below. That ignites a large fire and they jump down to the train from the overpass. But Omid is more reluctant and in his self-doubt hits the train awkwardly and bounces off into the dirt. Krista jumps out to pick him up and they quickly catch up with the train, but Lee, being a gentleman, chooses to help Krista and gets chewed out for it.
Son of a bitch, save him!
Thankfully, he's able to hop aboard despite the leg injury, and we leave the walkers behind with the fire doing jack shit to any of them. While the group approaches Savannah, Lee checks on a tuckered out Clementine when her walkie-talkie turns on and a strange voice says he's looking forward to their arrival, and he encourages Clem to find him whether Lee wants her to or not, and that's where episode 3 wraps up. Episode 4 opens up with us traversing the vacant streets of Savannah and Clementine asking Lee if she can hold the walkie-talkie, but Lee senses stranger danger and refuses to give it back. Kenny is dead set on finding a boat and gets annoyed when the group demands to rest so Omid's leg can take a break, but they're going to need to hurry because Lee spots someone ringing a nearby church bell. The walkie-talkie clicks on and the stranger tells them to get off the streets ASAP. Kenny and Krista down a couple walkers while Chuck goes buck wild with a shovel. He hits him in the head, but one smack likely isn't enough to kill them, so I won't add those ones. Lee frees Kenny with another kill right before we spot Clem and Ben getting cornered by a crowd of zombies. Ben does everything he can to ensure people hate him by running like a craven. That forces Lee to put his House of the Dead skills to use and take out 6 walkers before he sprints to Clem, who is saved by Chuck. Dude fucks with that shovel and urges us to GTFO while he stays back to distract the walkers. We watch him swing it wildly, but can only confirm one is dead here. The group locates a secure backyard out of sight where Omid takes a spill and reopens his leg wound. During this brief reprieve, Lee searches for a way inside the house and notices a doggy door that opens and closes based on the proximity of a dog collar. Well, it just so happens there's a relatively fresh grave by the doghouse, and through my power of deductive reasoning, there's a pretty good chance that their grave contains a dead dog. Oh, I was right. But the little fella gives us a place to a hideout, proving even in death he was a very good boy. The doggy door is a tad too small for Lee, and before we know it, Clem crawls through and unlocks the door. Inside the house, Lee questions Clem about the person she's been speaking to over the walkie. In her naivete, she believes it's someone that wants to help find her parents, but before we can find out more, Ben shouts for Lee, saying Kenny went into the attic to investigate a noise. Lee climbs up there to find Kenny staring at an emaciated zomboid that looks eerily similar to Duck, so we'll call him Loon. I already chose to have Kenny end his own son and don't want to put him through that again, so Lee ends the Loon's life with a swift smack of the wrench and buries him with his dog. While he does that, an unwanted watcher peers at him from the other side of the fence and runs off before he can get a good look at them. The group hears Lee's shouts and runs outside to check on him, and after hearing about that creepy shit, Kenny is convinced they need to go find a boat right now. Lee and Kenny set out and head towards the riverfront as a distant church bell ding dongs to lure the dead. Once they arrive at the riverfront, it's clear Kenny's idea is dead in the water, because anyone who had a boat would have taken that out to sea by now. He stays to verify the one boat remaining is usable, while Lee uses the telescope nearby to check the rest of the riverfront. However, it needs a quarter to function, and while we look around for one, Lee encounters a barrier made entirely out of zombies. Now this is super difficult to count accurately, since not every body stands out entirely. So after going up and down the wall looking for various arms, legs, heads, and other body parts, I counted a total of 173 zombies, not including the ones that are clearly alive and moving. After locating a quarter, Lee uses the telescope, with the only thing of interest being that parkour expert making their way towards our direction. Kenny tells Lee to sneak up on them while he takes the flank, which would have worked okay if Kenny actually fucking did something. Instead, he lets Lee get beat down and allows Clem to magically appear to save him from further humiliation. Then the dipshit comes out mid-conversation when Molly introduces herself, and it's plain and clear that we're fine. He gets low-kicked and accidentally fires his gun like an idiot. Molly warns us of Crawford, the place beyond the zombie barrier, who kills off any person they deem a burden on their little society. That means no children, no old people, and no sick or handicapped people. Molly admits she was the one ringing the church bells to lure zombies away from areas she plans to be, so she doesn't have to worry about them. But because of Kenny, our peace ends now, as the walkers come to investigate the gunshot. But he's not done fucking us over, not yet. After helping him climb up a fire escape, he drops Lee a second timer. Molly tosses Lee her ice tool so he can pry open the sewer grate and climb down. One zombie patiently waits for Lee to climb all the way down before falling into the sewer and cracking its head on the ground. Up ahead, we spot more walkers chowing down on some shit, but can't quite see what yet, and since they're blocking our path, Lee uses a series of valves to create noise and flush them away. Once it's clear, he finds that Chuck was what they were feasting on, but he was able to use a bullet to end it before being eaten alive. Lee uses Molly's ice tool on a lone zombie near our exit, where we uncover a hidden hole leading to a room containing a bunch of supplies. Lee walks through a door to find himself being stared at like he accidentally walked into the women's restroom. They believe Lee is from Crawford, but after some back and forth realize he's not and admit they're ex-residents that escaped and are paranoid about being found. Lee tells them he just wants to get back to his group, and more importantly Clementine, which tugs at Vernon's heartstrings and convinces him to guide Lee back using the expansive sewer tunnels. The other survivors beg him not to go since he's their only doctor, and if something happens to him then they are effed in the A. Back at the house, we find Molly is still hanging around, and Krista runs downstairs saying Omid is getting worse. Luckily, we have what the doctor ordered. A doctor. We have a doctor that agrees to check his leg out. While he does that, Lee goes searching for Clem, but can't find her anywhere inside the house. When he goes out back, she explodes through the shed doors like the tiniest little Kool-Aid man and reveals a boat in there. This news makes Kenny happier than that time he ran away and left Sean Green to die. But the bad news is the boat needs gasoline and a new battery before it's seaworthy. They can't just roam the city in search of those since Crawford has already done that. So using Savannah sewer tunnels, the plan is to sneak into Crawford and steal them. Leonardo pops his head out into an eerily quiet neighborhood. We spot someone patrolling a few steps away and sneak over to make sure they can't pose a problem. But when he turns around, we discover zombies have found their way inside the supposedly secure society and add another kill to the Count. The group very quickly realizes that Crawford is no more and sprint into an old school. Some of them see this plot twist as a good thing, since walkers are more predictable than armed humans, but Ben's fear reaches a galaxy far, far away.
I got a bad feeling about this.
In one of the classrooms, the group discusses a plan to split up so they can grab the supplies and get out. Vernon brought Bree from his group since she knew the place well, and with her help, everyone splits off to do their part. Realizing Ben keeps causing trouble, they have him remain in the classroom and see if he can open the armory door while Clementine supervises. Lee and Molly team up to find the battery, but Molly runs ahead and leaves Lee to find the way himself. He finds a locked shutter door and the strangest weather he's ever experienced. Molly despises zombie rain and expresses her hatred, but despite her vicious beating, the zombie doesn't die. All that noise attracts a few walkers, necessitating quick action to get under the shutter door. Inside the auto shop, Lee loosens the battery, which triggers the car alarm, basically telling the ghouls outside to come on in. Lee puts the battery in Molly's backpack and they climb up to the roof to safety. After some parkour, they get back to the school, but Molly tells Lee she has something to do and will keep the battery so they don't leave her behind. Inside the school, Kenny and Bree bust through the front doors with a pack of walkers on their tails. Lee shoots one in the head to close the doors and using a well-placed hatchet barricades them so no unwanted visitors can come inside. Down the hall, the nurse's station is being crowded by 6 walkers, likely faking it to go home, so Lee expels them permanently with 6 well-placed headshots. Inside, we find Vernon and Krista unable to access the medicine because the safe is locked. Their investigative skills are straight trash, so luckily Lee is here to solve the case. After watching a short tape of a woman being forced to get rid of her baby, we notice the doctor in the clip is the same one Molly went insano mode on, so Lee heads back outside to rob the walker of its belongings. However, Lee gets a brief surprise when a zombie jumps him and he shoves it backwards where a black void crushes its head. Seriously, what the fuck is that? It kinda looks like a TV, but who keeps those in a shed? We catch the Zopter crawling aimlessly and Isaac Clarke him into non-existence. Checking his pockets, we locate another tape and a combination to one of the SKU lockers on the way back to the nurse's room. Lee inserts the second tape to discover Crawford's downfall began with the woman refusing to comply with their rules and shanking the doc and shooting people off screen. The plus side is we watch the doc punch in the combination to the safe, so Vernon is able to start up that back alley post-apocalyptic pharmacy he's always dreamed about. Lee stays behind to watch the third tape, which shows Molly had a particular agreement with the doc to perform favors in exchange for hush-hush medicine for her sister, but the doc says this is the final time due to restrictions on inventory. Directly after that, Lee confronts Molly, who just got back to the school, and she confirms she was part of Crawford and lost her diabetic sister once the rules changed, so she just wanted to grab a photo of her since that's all she has left. As they round the corner, Ben jumps out in the least intimidating way, but Lee recognizes that hatchet, and yet another massive mistake, he unbarred the doors, allowing walkers inside. He does nothing at all to help, leaving Molly to quickly kill 3 of them while Clementine comes out to assist. We lock ourselves in the back classroom where Kenny begins to break down the armory. The realization that he's a fuck up is too much for Ben to bear, so he treats this moment as a therapy sesh. He admits he's the one that led to Duck getting bit, which gives Kenny the extra motivation to boot the armory open and try to strangle him. Time is running low because the zombies outside are hangry as hell. They bust through the door searching for that cheese, adding Bree to the count. The group runs into the armory that's been picked clean, minus a few bullets and 1 rifle next to a dead Crawford citizen. Kenny tosses the rifle to Lee, who downs 8 zombies as he backs up the stairs and depletes all the ammo. Krista does Lee a solid by taking out 2 more before he resorts to using the hatchet to take out the others. He Sparta kicks one off the staircase, but we don't see what happens to its head, so I'm leaving that one off. The final zombie takes a bullet to the face, so Lee and the rest can focus on climbing onto the roof. But as they take turns doing that, the bell starts ringing, and for some reason nobody bothered to mention the fucking zombie hanging from it. So like karma coming back to bite Ben, he's snatched by the swinger. Lee shoots at Pronto, sending Ben falling, but Lee catches him and begs him to climb up. Feeling guilty about being kinda worthless, Ben urges Lee to let him go. Ben hits the ground below but doesn't die right away, instead getting devoured alive by the lucky zombies nearby. We join the group back at the house where it appears Omid is dead, but he's just a heavy sleeper and groggily greets the crew. Vernon pulls Lee aside and offers to take Clementine off his hands, but Lee is hesitant and counters his offer with a tangerine. Later, Lee catches Molly dipping out, who claims she doesn't like the water anyway and the boat will be too cramped. After that, Lee goes to chat with Clem and breaks the bad news that we won't have time to search for her parents, which gets her crying and allows Lee to sleep peacefully. When he wakes up, she's missing. so he goes out searching for her, thinking Vernon may have left with her. He sees her hat on the ground and jumps over the fence to find her walkie-talkie there as well. A hidden trash zombie pops out and Lee quickly spills its brains on the concrete. A few seconds later, he realizes the zombie bit him, and he barely gets time to process it before the group comes outside asking what he's doing. You can choose to tell them you got bit or try and hide it, but the truth will come out eventually, so I have Lee show them the bite. Telltale chose to create a Walking Dead game because so many of the people on the team were fans of the comics and wanted to tell an engaging story in that universe. Many adventure games allow players to process and think about their decisions, but they felt this universe lent itself to high-pressure situations that force players into making a quick decision that may impact their story significantly. One of my favorite features is the stats screen they show at the end of every episode that compares your decisions with everyone else's. It lets you examine how differently your playthrough is compared to other people's. There's one at the very end that I differed greatly on, so I look forward to everyone's judgment on that. Lee tells the rest that his condition doesn't matter and that his priority is finding Clementine. He requests everyone's help to go get her, and we jump forward to Vernon's hideout to find it completely abandoned. We hear a significant number of walkers outside and block the back door. At a loss, the group ponders where they can find Clementine until she chimes in over the walkie-talkie along with the stranger that we heard coming into Savannah. We begin episode 5 by begging the stranger not to hurt Clem, but he makes a snide remark about how he isn't like Lee. He goes AFK and leaves the group stuck in the hospital basement with no way out until Lee misuses a rib separator to pry the elevator doors open. Before he can tell the group, he begins feeling a little woozy here and faints. Lee wakes up to Kenny about ready to David his arm, but stops after realizing he's awake. The hope is that lopping the arm off will save Lee from turning or at least slow the process down. Here we get to choose if we want to keep the left arm or remove it, and in an excruciatingly brutal scene, I elect to saw that muffa off. The sound design here is perfect. Using raw bone and chicken legs, sound designer Lazar Levine sawed the meat in his own kitchen to achieve the sound of Lee's arm being removed. The gore sound effects in general were done using food, with numerous vegetables being sacrificed. Lee passes out due to shock and wakes up without half an arm. Once he's awake, they waste little time climbing the ladder in the elevator shaft, smartly going before Lee in case he encounters issues climbing. One zombie decides the undead life ain't for him and tumbles down, nearly missing everyone on the ladder. Once we get to the rooftop, we notice the streets of Savannah are far more populated now. Wondering if they missed the memo on the zombie crawl, they can no longer get down to the streets. Lee sets a ladder in place to crawl over to the church bell and bring the walkers over to that side of the hospital so they can take the exterior stairs on the other side of the building. He nearly falls with the ladder, which rocks the fuck out of a walker below, but doesn't kill it since we don't see a dead zombie on the ground later on. Using the parkour skills we learned from Molly, Lee is able to hop back to the roof where no one even tries to help him up. We skip forward to the house and another kill by Lee. On top of losing Clementine, we find out the boat has also been stolen, with a note from Vernon basically giving them a middle finger. Now that their plan has crashed and burned, Krista suggests they focus on finding Clem and getting to the countryside instead. Lee agrees that's the best solution, but they need to focus on surviving the incoming walker onslaught first. They barricade themselves inside the house, which is quickly overrun from all sides. The smell of rotting cheese is overwhelming, in large part due to Zombie Bree being the first walker killed, followed by 13 more before they're forced into the attic. Clementine buzzes in over the walkie to quickly inform Lee she's at the hotel, which is all the info he needs to motivate him to find a way out. After a heated argument with Kenny, who is itching to Larry up this situation, Lee throws a statue at the wall and reveals a weakness. They realize that they can bustle through it, and after a few minutes are able to open a hole to the adjoining house. We step inside to a tragic scene of two lovers that elected to go out their own way. They jump to the next rooftop and peer into a dark hole none of them want any part of. That is until Kenny smacks the walkie out of Lee's grasp and sends it tumbling down. With that being our only link to Clementine, Krista hops down to grab it before anyone can tell her otherwise. But down in the dark, it's very stinky, and strange noises emanate from all around. Realizing walkers spy fresh meat, Kenny pays for his fuck up by jumping down and giving Krista a boost. He yells at them to leave him behind while walkers swarm his position. He lets off a few shots and runs through the mob. And since we never see them kill Kenny, we can't curse those bastards quite yet. The remaining 3 survivors find themselves a block away from Clem's location, but the only way across is this sketchy ass sign. It breaks before Lee can cross, so he jumps down to the streets and begins hacking his way to the hotel. Lee messily adds 10 more walkers to the count, with 3 of those being contest winners winners that were added to the game, along with their fellow winner Bree Rosenholm, the character modeled for Bree. Lee enters the Marsh House, which is based on the real-life Marshall House on the north end of Savannah. He enters room 39 that is seemingly empty outside of the obvious location Clem is being kept in, but Lee gets surprised by a man that enters through the adjoining doors and tells him to put his weapons down. We take a seat and have a chat, learning this man is the owner of that station wagon Lee elected to take supplies from back in episode 2, which ultimately led to his family's demise. He lays out all the horrible decisions Lee made throughout the game, making the player feel like crap for their shitty decisions. Clem apparently fed him all this information over the walkie-talkie, and you actually start to feel bad for him, until he leans forward and talks to his wife's decapitated head inside the bowling bag. Clem is able to free herself and air rape the stranger's arm, giving Lee an opening to whoop that creepy ass. During the scuffle, the stranger gets the upper hand on Lee, probably because he has twice as many as him, but what he didn't anticipate was a bullet to the brain by Clementine. After a hug, Lee tells Clem they need to find a safe place before he tells her what happened to his arm. Upon exiting, the final contest winner greets us at the door and pays Lee no mind whatsoever, instead noticing Clementine and dying for it. Realizing the walker's stench slathered all over his clothes is the reason why he was invisible to him, he paints Clem black with zombie gack and do the zombie walk outside. However, Clem recognizes the pair of them as her parents and stops in her tracks. But what she doesn't know is that Lee gets sleepy when he stops moving and he hits the ground. He comes to inside of a jewelry store Clem was able to drag him into and admits that he was bitten. This starts the final scene, and my god, man, it's heartbreaking. Jared Emerson Johnson's score plays during this sequence and it elevates the sadness exponentially. Lee apologizes to Clem for failing her and does his best to get up and walk with her, but the virus has rendered his body uncooperative and unable to continue on. He guides Clem on how she'll be able to escape, but first advises her to handcuff him to the radiator so he won't be a danger to her once he turns. Next, she has to try and grab the gun from the zombie guard's holster so she has protection, but he falls out of the chair and requires a few smacks to the head to calm down. Clem is hesitant to leave Lee behind. She just saw her parents as walkers, and now Lee is going to be one too, which leads us to our final big decision. Do we have Clem end Lee's life here, or leave him to eventually turn? With the self-doubt she expressed and the already traumatizing shit she's been through, I make the tough choice to tell Clem to leave Lee. He advises Clem to find Omid and Krista who can take care of her moving forward, and leaves her with 3 final words. I miss you. She gives his hand a squeeze and takes one final look at Lee as he slumps over and succumbs to his wound for the final kill of the game. The game cuts to a title card and shows us our final stats, with only 5% of other people making the same decision as me on Lee's fate. Once the credits finish rolling, we see Clementine hiking out in the countryside and stop under a lone tree. She looks up to see 2 people in the distance, and after a few seconds they halt and look in her direction. It zooms in on Clem's face and the game ends there. I finished The Walking Dead Season 1 with 329 kills. Zombies were easily the majority of those, making up nearly 87% of that total, with humans clocking in at 12% and the 2 animal deaths to round it all out. I wound up dying 5 times altogether, once at the motel, once at the train station, and 1 brain dead moment in the bell tower contributing 3 of those deaths. It took me 10 hours and 12 minutes to beat The Walking Dead, and with 329 kills and 5 deaths, that gives us a kill on average every 1.86 minutes and a death just about every 2 hours. The Walking Dead felt like it came out of nowhere back in 2012, and it was torture having to wait a month or 2 for each episode to drop. It really scratches that itch for great zombie content that the AMC series never really did for me. I'll play the individual 400 Days episode next to bridge the gap between Season 1 and 2, but before I start Season 2, I'm gearing up for Alan Wake 2 by pivoting to the first game. If you enjoy these videos, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. That shit really helps me out and lets me know what kind of videos you want to see. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm King Deschain, signing off for now.